My name is Howard Eber, and I am an alcoholic. We are in There is a solution. We have been talking about the problem pretty much up until this point. The doctor's opinion magnificently defines what our problem is a threefold malady made up of a physical allergy, a mental obsession, and a spiritual malady, whereby we are, during periods of forced abstinence, we are, to put it mildly, restless, irritable, and discontented. And I say put it mildly because for me, that was just so low on I was ready to tear my skin off. I was on fire. My skin didn't feel like it fit. Everything hurt. I was brutally sarcastic to anybody or anything around me. I was not a nice person to be around. And eventually, the mental obsession told me that I can get some apparent relief by taking something, and I would give in to that obsession, trigger the physical allergy, and I'm off to the races. And we're now, no good book ever presents a problem without giving us a solution to it. It'll always explain itself. And just like any other good book, any good textbook, big book follows that pattern. Bill has told us about a problem, and now he's going to start talking to us about the problem, about the solution. And he started on page 17 by telling us some of the things that will not work. And one of the most important things he said on page 17 is that fellowship alone is insufficient. That fellowship is only one of the two elements of the cement that bind us together. That what keeps us together is the program of action that we found. That's the news that this book brings, is the news of the program, not the news of the fellowship. And where we are today is on page 20. And I'm just going to review a little bit. I know we're kind of at the bottom of the page, but I just want to go over a few things. At the top of the page, one of the first things Bill says is our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help their needs. A couple of points there. The word depend in that case is a must. So we've highlighted it, circled it, whatever, in green highlight. I'm sure someone will put that in the chat so you know the colors that we talk about when we're highlighting. But something I wanted to point out too here, I always forget to do this, and it's probably a minor point, but I'm a bit of a geek. I'm a bit of a big book technician, and I like this kind of stuff. I read to you the line that said, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers. Originally, instead of ex-problem drinkers, anywhere it says ex-problem drinkers in this book, it used to say ex-alcoholics. But in I believe it's the 11th printing of the first edition, any reference to, quote, ex-alcoholics was changed to ex-problem drinkers. And I think you could see why. Because we will always be alcoholics. We're never going to be cured of that. We have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body, but we can't really say ex-alcoholics because it's always present. It's always one bad idea away from getting woken up. So I thought that was important to point out that in the first edition up to I believe the 11th printing, anywhere it now says ex-problem drinkers, it used to say ex-alcoholics. So continuing, the next paragraph says, you may already have asked yourself why it is that all of us become so very ill from drinking. Doubtless you're curious as to discover how and why. And highlight this, please. In the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. Now let's break that down a little bit. In face of expert opinion to the contrary, you may want to turn to the doctor's opinion. And in the doctor's opinion, probably I think the second to last page of it, in the fourth edition, it's page XXX, which I now know is Roman numeral 30. If you have the study version, it's XXVIII. It's a little bit more challenging. That's Roman numeral 28. But what on that page, the reason why I'm mentioning it is at the bottom of the page, it mentions an expert opinion. It says amongst physicians, the general opinion, this is the expert opinion, seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. And if you remember when we read that paragraph originally, I had a comeback for it. I suggested that you wrote down underneath that the first words of this book. But we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So to the expert opinions and to the physicians, we say, how do you like dem apples? So let's continue because there's so much more in that paragraph we were talking about. Let me find it again. We have recovered. Recovered is highlighted in orange. It is, I think, the 9th reference in the book. In the emails that went out today, most of them included the reference list to the recovered. Andy, if you want to put that up, I think I don't have a number for that one. It's just a reference to recovered. This is number 9. This is the 9th reference to recovered in the book. If you don't, here it is, number 9. We have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. There are now 35 on this list. If you don't have a copy of this list, just send me an email and I'll make sure you get it. Like I said, I think it's in most of the emails that went out. But this breaks down all of the recovered references that we're talking about. And like I said, right now, there's 35. What we just read is number 9 of the 35. And you can take that down, Andy. To complete the sentence, it says what we have recovered from, a hopeless state of mind and body. That's what we recovered from. And then it says, if you're an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? Have to is a must. And please notice it says, doesn't say. What it doesn't say is, what do I have to say? What do I have to feel? What do I have to think? What do I have to discuss? No, it doesn't say that. It says what I have to do. This is a program for people who do it, not people who talk about it. I heard someone once say there are 2 types of meetings, 2 types of attendees at meetings. There's the doers who are too busy doing to judge other people, and they're the judges who are too busy judging to actually do any work to help other people. So be a doer. That's what this is about. That if you want to know, if you want to get over it, what do I have to do? And like anything else, he answers it in the next sentence. It is the purpose of this book, and let's highlight this first sentence, to answer such questions specifically. On this page, he says specifically. On page 29, we're going to get to it in a moment, he uses the term clear cut. In the foreword to the first edition, he uses the word precisely. And I draw your attention to that because only an alcoholic could read words like specifically, precisely, and clear cut and still make a statement like, there's many ways to work this program as there are people in the program. I don't know. Precisely, specifically, clear cut pretty much answers it for me, tells me what it is. It is not a generality. It is not word of mouth. It is specific. See you soon, man. Okay. So it's the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically, again, precisely with clear-cut directions. And then please underline this. We shall tell you what you must do. Well, it doesn't say that, does it? It says we shall tell you what we have done. And above that, above tell you, please write show you. Because that's how they're going to tell us. They're going to show us how they did this. This is not a book of instructions. This is written by according to the book, 100 men and women who've recovered, and it's the purpose of this book to show us how they have recovered. So here at the beginning of the book, he said it's the purpose of this book to show you how we have recovered. And later on, I believe it's on page 152, he says, right before he finishes up his section of the book, Bill says, we have shown you how we have gotten out from under. And let me just double check. I think that's page 152, Bert, in case you want to take a note on that. Page
First full paragraph.
on 152. Yes, thank you very much, Maureen. First paragraph, 152:1, we have shown how we got out from under. We have shown. In the forward to the first edition, they are promising us they will show us. We just read how it's the intention of this book to show us. And 150 pages later, he's saying, we have shown you. So if you want to know what they've done, see this? This tells you how they did it, and all you have to do is follow all of that. If you want what they have, then you have to do the work that they did. So continuing, before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points as we see them. I'm going to suggest you take a second and highlight the whole next paragraph. Because what they have, what is contained in this next paragraph are things that other people have said to us about our drinking, have said about us. So as we go through these points, I'm going to suggest you put a little pencil check mark next to any one that has been addressed to you. See if people have said these things to you or variations of this. How many times have people said to us, I can take it or leave it alone? Why can't you? My hand is up. I've been told that my whole life. My dad would say that to me. I could do it. Your brother could do it. Why can't you just stop? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That's a great one. I don't know what a gentleman drinks like, but what I've seen, I'm not interested in it. You know, to me, gentlemen drink like it's alcohol abuse. I was at a restaurant the other day, and a guy was sitting at a table that was reserved. So the maitre d' came over and asked him if he would please move. This is a reserved table. They have another place where he could sit. And he had a glass of wine on the table that they had given him, and he left it there. And he got up to walk away. And I said, "Shit, you left your wine there." He said, "Nah, it's okay." That's alcohol abuse. That's alcohol abuse. I'd no sooner leave my wine there than I would my wallet. Okay. So that fellow can't handle his liquor. Present. Why don't you try beer and wine? Now you could substitute that for anything. Why don't you try weed and Valium? There's a popular one. Lay off the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. He would stop if he wanted. He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl. I should think he'd stop for her sake. Some years ago, there was a great movie called Arthur, the original Arthur, with Dudley Moore as Arthur. And if you're familiar with the movie, Arthur's an alcoholic from a very wealthy family who's about to be married off to another wealthy family. It's a prearranged marriage, and he's not really keen on it. So he goes out to dinner with the young lady who he's promised to, and he's trying to convince her that this is a bad idea. And he says that I'm an alcoholic. I drink. That's what I do. And the young lady, whose name was Suzanne just leans back and says, well, the right girl could stop you from drinking. And Arthur's response was, she'd have to be a pretty big, strong woman to stop me from drinking. So I can identify with that. She's such a sweet girl. I should think he'd stop for her. Say, the doctor told him if he ever drank again, it would kill him. But here he is, all lit up again. And I've got one, and we could all add to that. We can all add to that. But one of the ones I added to that was, you just had a bad case of jitters. Do you really want to go through that again? Absolutely. All the time. I said no, but I did. Okay. Now, these are commonplace observations on drinkers, which we hear all the time. Please highlight this next sentence. Back of them is, and let's underline, a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. Ignorance and misunderstanding. The greatest example I can give you of that, not the stuff we just read in that previous paragraph, which is all valid, but the greatest example I've ever come across of ignorance and misunderstanding, just say no. And I'm not going to get political about who said it, but the expression, the person who said it couldn't have been further away politically than my dad. And my dad said it to me all the time. Just say no. Now I got a point that I like to make here, just for the hell of it. The word ignorance. We're going to read a chapter pretty soon called We Agnostics. Agnostic is broken down into ag, meaning without. Gnostic comes from the word gnosis, I believe the Greek word, for knowledge. So agnostic means without knowledge, someone who is without knowledge, without experience of God in their life. There's another word that means the same thing. Ignorance. Ig means without. Ignorance comes from, I believe, the Latin word. I'm not sure on the derivation. I could check that, but I don't want to take the time now. For knowledge. So ignorance doesn't mean someone is stupid, or agnostic doesn't mean they're stupid. They're just lacking knowledge. And anyone who says just say no is lacking knowledge. How do you explain craving to somebody who's never experienced it? I'm at a loss. I would never know how to do that. It doesn't get in. Telling them that the first one requires the second demands the third screams out for the fourth and the fifth. And by the time I get to the 10th drink, I want that 11th more than I've ever wanted anything in my life. How do you explain that to someone who hasn't experienced it? Ignorance and misunderstanding. So we see that these expressions, and please underline these expressions, and the previous ones in the last paragraph, refer to people whose reactions are very different than ours. Now, Bill's about to take us through 3 types of alcoholics. Let's call it that, of ex-problem drinkers. And as we go through each one, I'm going to suggest you ask yourself, would the questions in that previous paragraph apply to this type of drinker? Would it affect the way that particular drinker drinks or consumes their drugs? Again, that fellow can't handle it. The doctor told him if he drank again, it would kill him, and on and on. How those statements would affect the drinking or drugging of the moderate drinker, the hard drinker, and the real alcoholic. So let's take the first one. Let's highlight this whole paragraph and underline the first 2 words, moderate drinkers. Moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely, and please underline if they have a good reason for it. And more importantly, let's double underline this next sentence. They can take it or leave it alone, which means, and you may want to write this right after that sentence, no allergy, no obsession. If you can take it or leave it alone, you don't have either of those. So that means every one of those statements in the previous paragraphs, those accusations, would have an effect on the moderate drinker. If any one of them was thrown at him or her, it would affect the way they drink or drug, because they can just turn it off. Stop or moderate. No allergy, no obsession. Type 2. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker. Let's underline hard drinker. And I like to think of the hard drinker as an acute alcoholic. An acute alcoholic. An acute illness can kill you. If you have an acute illness, it can kill you. But if it is treated properly, it can go away and will never reappear again. That's an acute alcoholic. A real alcoholic we're about to see, that doesn't apply to, that they will always return to it. So let's just go one at a time. He says, then we have a certain type of hard drinker. And next to, incidentally, I forgot to tell you, next to moderate drinker, I wrote, not me. Just to be sure we're not talking about me. It's not me. I'm not that moderate guy. I can't take it or leave it alone. Next to hard drinker and acute alcoholic, I wrote not me, because that ain't me either. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. And that's because he may be addicted to whatever it is he's drinking or consuming. Today, there's a lot of drugs out there that are very easily you can form addictions to. That doesn't mean you're an addict or an alcoholic. It just means you've become dependent upon that. And if treated properly in a detox and a rehab and cleaned out and gotten back, nursed back to health, you can go on with your life and never have another problem. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. And let's highlight the rest of this paragraph. If a sufficient reason, and you may want to circle A, because it doesn't say if reasons, a significant, if a strong reason, singular reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also, what does it say? Let's underline, stop or moderate. And under it, next to it, around it, anywhere, no allergy, no obsession. So you can stop or moderate, you don't have those. Although he may find it difficult and troublesome, and you may want to underline, may even need medical attention. He may have to go to a detox. Like I said, may become addicted to that particular chemical, dependent upon that particular chemical. It's possible. But once nursed back to health, can drink like a normal person, can drug like a normal person, if there is such a thing. I was in treatment with a number of people like that. I grew up with a number of people like that. Drank like I did, drugged like I did, got jammed up like I did, everything like I did, except when they went to treatment, they didn't go back again and again and again. They lived the rest of their lives without having to go to treatment, without getting any arrests, and they had a drink here or there, or a drug here or there, and their life is fine. That ain't me. So, what about the real alcoholic? And let's underline real alcoholic. And above it, I wrote in capital letters, that's me. What about me? He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. And let's highlight this, please. But at some stage of his drinking career, I love when Bill uses that word career, because it was a full-time job. It was a 24/7 job, and it paid shit, and the benefits were lousy, but it was a career. It was definitely a career. Although he may find, he begins to, and let's underline, lose all control of his liquor consumption, and let's underline once he starts to drink. Now, I actually drew an arrow between lose all control once he starts to drink, because we've just defined the physical allergy. That doesn't apply to the hard or the moderate drinker. It applies to the real alcoholic. A hard drinker may drink like us, may get jammed up like us, but if they have to moderate or stop, they can do that. Those questions apply to the first two groups. Let's take a look at this. Andy, I think it's 20.5. Should be in your emails. Again, if it wasn't, just send me an email and yell at me and I'll make good on it. 3 types of drinkers. There's type 1, the moderate drinker, and this is courtesy of our friend Rob, and he got it from Drew, but I kind of improvised a bit. I added a few things to it, so I hope they don't mind. 3 types of drinkers we've just gone through. Type 1, the moderate drinker, has little trouble giving it up. Why? No obsession, no allergy. Type 2, the hard drinkers. Drinking is becoming a problem, but if given a sufficient reason, they can stop or moderate. Yes, they may have formed that mental obsession, and that's why I'm saying they go to detox, they go to treatment, they lick it, and they're done. But they don't have the physical allergy. And then we have type 3. At some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. In other words, yes, obsession, yes, allergy. Now, for what it's worth, these 3 types, Bill talks about 3 types of drinkers here. And in about another 80 pages or so in Two Wives, he breaks down several other types of drinkers. Husband number 1, husband number 2, etc. What's the difference? What's the difference between the 3 he talks about here and the 4 he talks about later? Well, no, keep that up, Andy, if you would, please. The reason is these types of drinkers on page 20 and 21, this centers on whether each type could give up drinking. The moderate drinker could definitely give it up. He's got no obsession, no allergy. The hard drinker could give it up if he has a little trouble. Hospitalization will help, but he has no allergy. Type 3 can't give it up because of the allergy and the obsession. Now, the types of drinkers that he describes in Two Wives, if you look in the right-hand corner of this graphic, they're talking about the heavy drinker, the person who's showing lack of control, unable to stay on the water wagon. Number 3, who's gone further than 2. And number 4, the one you completely despair. But those 4 center not on if they could give up drinking. Those 4 types focus on whether each type really wants to quit drinking. I used to think they're the same thing. What's the point? What's the difference between these 2 things? Next time you read them, think about that. The group we just read are focusing on whether each type of drinker could give up. You read the types on page 108, 109, and 110. Bert, that's where those pages are, 108, 109, and 10. He talks about the 4 types of husbands. He centers on whether each type wants to give up drinking. He's not talking about whether they could. He's talking about whether they really want to give up drinking. And that appropriately is in Two Wives. All right, we can take that down, Andy. Okay, so we're on page 21. And we just finished the paragraph that says that he loses all control once he starts to drink. We're going to go through the next paragraph, and I'm going to suggest you do the same thing. Check off things that you relate to, that you identify with, or personalize it. In my book, I have this paragraph personalized, which means each place it says he does or he is, I've replaced it with I do or I am. Mark Houston, when he was talking about this part of the book, says in his book, he wrote the word Mark. Instead of he does, he says Mark does absurd things. Mark is a real Jekyll and Hyde, etc. So it's still personalizing it. You may want to put your name there or just put I do. But you should be able to relate to every one of these. So let's start going through them. And like I said, let's put a number, a check mark next to each one that you relate to. Here's a fellow who is puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. I do absurd, incredible, tragic things when drinking. Show of hands. Put up some hands when we come through this. Yeah, you bet. You bet. He is, or I am, a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Yep, present. Yes, absolutely. And for those of you who are not familiar, Jekyll and Hyde is a novelette. It was a short book, a small book, written by Robert Louis Stevenson. Robert Louis Stevenson died at the age of 44. He was very likely an alcoholic and very definitely an addict. He was addicted to an herb that, or a grain that grew where he lived called ergot, E-R-G-O-T, which contains lysergic acid. So he was addicted to ergot and cocaine. And he wrote a book about a doctor who everybody was the nicest guy in the world. Everybody loved him, but he felt insufficient. He felt alone in a crowd. He felt less than. So he came up with a concoction that he could drink that would make him everything he thought he wanted to be. The problem was, in this case, it made him out to be a murderer. It made him go way, way further than he expected. But Dr. Jekyll is the nice guy. That's who I was when I wasn't drinking or drugging. But put those chemicals in me and I become somebody else. I used to think I had a conscience when I wasn't drinking or drugging, or at least I tried to. But once you put those chemicals in me, all bets are off. I will do things I would never consider doing otherwise. I become that monster, Mr. Hyde. So I've got a check mark next to that, and I am a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I am seldom mildly intoxicated. I don't even know what the hell that's like. Mildly intoxicated. I passed by that road sign so fast it made your head spin. I don't know what that means. Mildly intoxicated. He's always, or I am always, more or less insanely drunk. My disposition while drinking resembles my normal nature but little. Show of hands, anyone there? Anyone identify with that sucker? Yeah, you bet. I'm sorry, he may be one of the finest fellows in the world. Yeah, I got my hand up already. I don't even need to know what comes after that. I just like that one. I may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let me drink for a day and I frequently become disgustingly, even dangerously antisocial. Present. Oh, yeah, big check, big check. I have a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. Absolutely notoriously guilty. Because if it was an important thing to do, I had to get sufficiently lubricated and drugged up to do it. But because I'm an addict and an alcoholic, I don't see the line that's there to tell me when to stop. So I always go way past it and blow the deal entirely. And I've highlighted actually the rest of this paragraph because this is my favorite. This guy this is me. I am often perfectly sensible and well balanced except in concerning everything except liquor, but in that respect I am incredibly, please underline, dishonest and selfish. The defects start coming out. I often possess special abilities, skills, and aptitudes and have a promising career ahead of me. I use my gifts to build up a bright outlook for my family and myself, and then pull the structure down on my head by a senseless series of sprees. Present. That's me. That's my favorite. I always got tall, good looking, irresistible to women, and debt free every time I got drunk or high. That is definitely me. I am a fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated I ought to sleep the clock around. Yet early next morning, I search madly for the bottle I misplaced the night before. I wouldn't call what I did sleeping. I wouldn't call getting up waking up. I passed out and I came to. And when I came to, I searched madly for that bottle or that drug I hid the night before. But sometime during the night, I got up and used it. So it's never there. Or it turns up years later. I have suits that I took to the tailor some years ago and found drugs in one of the inside pockets that I know I probably searched and tore up my house, something fierce to try and find, right down the garbage disposal. But what I had to do to look for that and could not find it. Okay, if I can afford it, I may have liquor concealed all over my house to be certain no one gets my entire supply away from me to throw down the waste pipe. And please highlight this next sentence and underline the first 4 words. I'll tell you why in a minute. As matters grow worse, I begin to use a combination of high-powered sedative. Please underline the word sedative, and above it, let's write the word drugs and liquor to quiet my nerves so I can go to work. Anyone who's read Dr. Bob's Nightmare knows that he admitted to having a 17-year goofball nightmare habit. He was addicted to sedatives, to barbiturates for 17 years. And because he had an ample supply available to him as a physician, didn't cost him much or anything. But liquor did. So he couldn't afford to drink all day long. Plus, he had to maintain a little bit to work. So he'd load up on the sedatives in the morning and throughout the day. And once that time came, whether it's 5 o'clock or any other time when the patients were done, out came the bottle, and that was it for the day. 17 years, Dr. Bob was addicted to pills and alcohol. And as we talked about in Bill's story, we saw also that Bill bottomed out on the combination of alcohol and drugs. It landed him on the rocks. He bottomed out in it. So let's not be so harsh on people who mention drugs at an AA meeting. Because if we started an AA meeting and only alcoholics were allowed in, Bill and Bob would not be allowed in. So let's cut some slack here. Then comes the day when I simply cannot make it and get drunk all over again. I don't know how many times I started out the day just to get to that level of being able to just get to that sweet spot so I can get through the day, and then figured just a little bit more, just a little bit more. And then it was over. It was calling in sick for the day. If I can even find the phone, get up off the floor and find the phone. Then comes, oh, I just said that right. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedatives. Not any doctor that I knew of was prescribing morphine like that, but I had a couple of doctors that, for the right amount of money, would give you anything you wanted. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a legitimate doctor who gives you drugs or other chemicals to taper off. Then I begin to appear at detoxes and rehabs. We don't call them hospitals anymore, they're detoxes, and we don't call them sanitariums. When was the last time you talked to someone who said, I just got out of the asylum, they just released me from the sanitarium? Not for some time. It's detoxes and rehabs. Okay, this is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic, as our behavior patterns vary. Let's underline our behavior patterns vary. We talked about that earlier on in the doctor's opinion. If you remember, we talked about how we have now 120 some odd people here. If every one of us started drinking right now, everybody would exhibit different behaviors, different behavior patterns. You'd have the person in the corner who's telling jokes. You'd have somebody over in the other corner who's pontificating on all of the world's problems. You absolutely have a few people who are hitting on members of the same or opposite sex. You have the guys in the corner who are starting fights, just want to just throw down with anybody or anything. And you have guys like me who just sit in the corner and pontificate on everybody and everything to myself. We all exhibit behavior patterns that are different, but we all, every one of us, all 120 some odd of us, do one thing the same. We go looking for that next drink or drug. Whether we exhibit one of those other behavior patterns doesn't matter. That's what makes us different once we get under the influence. But we all do the same thing once we start, which is go looking for the next. And that's what he's talking about here. Our behavior patterns may vary, but this description should identify him roughly. The description that we just went through in the previous paragraph, that's the description he's talking about. And I've highlighted the whole next paragraph. It's a pretty good definition of insanity. Why does he behave like this? Why do we behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle, and a debacle is just a great disaster. That's what a debacle is. A great disaster, not a little disaster. It's again Bill's use of hyperbole, a disaster, a great debacle. With all its attendant suffering and humiliation, let's ask the $1,000,000 question here and underline it. Why is it he takes that one drink? There's the $1,000,000 question. You know, these questions that we're going through in this paragraph, I used to think were rhetorical questions. But the more I read this book, I realized that Bill placed them here so we can ask ourselves these questions. And our lack of adequate answers shines a light on our predicament, on our insanity. Our lack of answers for the questions he poses here, these are not rhetorical questions. They're meant to shine a light on our predicament because of our lack of adequate answers for those things. Why do we behave like that? Why do we take that one drink? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? There's another one of those questions. What has become of the common sense and willpower he still sometimes, and let's underline sometimes, as my drinking gets worse, the common sense and willpower that I sometimes display dissipates, turns into complete unmanageability. But that's part of the progression. As my drinking and drugging gets worse, the common sense and willpower that I sometimes display dissipates. It disappears. It turns into outright unmanageability. So he's saying, what has become of that common sense that we sometimes display with respect to other matters? Again, our lack of adequate answers should reflect on what our condition is, our true predicament. Perhaps there'll never be full answer to these questions, and I've highlighted the rest of this paragraph. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic, and let's underline this, reacts differently from normal people. Let's underline that. We're going to come back to that in a minute. And before we come back to it, Andy, if you can get ready with number 24-7. but let's not put it up yet. Reacts differently from normal people. We're not sure why. Once a certain point is reached, little can be done for him. We cannot answer the riddle. Well, for what it's worth, the riddle, to a great extent, has now been answered, meaning the quote phenomenon of craving is not a phenomenon anymore. We can explain it. Joe and Charlie did a great job of explaining how we metabolize. It makes my hair hurt just to go through that shit. But I don't need to know what my body does with it. I know what happens. That's all I need to know. So we can now answer that riddle. But the statement about reacting differently from normal people. I was at a meeting a week or two ago and I was asked to be the I guess the guide. There was a 4-person panel led by Bill Shaberg, who wrote Writing the Big Book. And I was honored to be there with Bill and some of these other people. But Bill said something during that presentation that really hit home about Bill Wilson's genius. Bill Wilson's genius was not in his ability to explain the allergy or the obsession or the spiritual malady. Andy, if you'll give me that page from Bill Shaberg's presentation. Careful reading of the first 124 pages of the big book reveals 77 references to Bill's diagnosis of the alcohol's basic problem. What is our basic problem? That we have an allergy, that we have an obsession, that we have a spiritual malady? No. We suffer from insanity that tells us to pick up that first drink. That's the genius. And Bill tells us it 77 times in the 164 pages. Something to keep in mind. And we'll come back to that in a couple of minutes because we're about to run into one of those references. But bottom of page 22, we know that while the alcoholic, and please underline the alcoholic, and you may want to start doing something that I always tell my people to do, which is anywhere in the book where it says the real alcoholic or the alcoholic, I underline it, and above it I put A/O, meaning allergy, obsession. Just so I'm clear that he's not talking about somebody else. He's talking about me. I have the allergy. I have the obsession. Oops, he's talking about me. Let me pay attention. I can't sit back and say, oh, he's talking about somebody else. That's Andy's problem, or that's Paul's problem, or Mark's problem. Nope, that's Howard's problem, because I have the allergy. I have the obsession. So we know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, and please underline for months and years. I once spent a year without a thing. A year in total abstinence. I was losing my shit. I was losing my mind. I was constantly feeling like I got to tear my skin off. I was a raw nerve. I was an exposed nerve. Restless, irritable, and discontented doesn't come anywhere close to describing what I felt like, but I made it through a year. So while we do that, he may react like other men. And here's the part that I have highlighted, because this is what describes me. We are equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever, please underline any alcohol, whatever. I'm also going to suggest you highlight the rest of these 3 lines on this page. And I've underlined any alcohol, whatever. And above it, I've written the way it was phrased in the doctor's opinion, which is in alcohol in any form whatsoever. Remember that? Alcohol in any form whatsoever. And I pointed out that the way I understand that it could be if you drink it, swallow it, smoke it, snort it, shoot it, shove it, it doesn't matter. Any chemical I put in my body that alters my perception of reality is alcohol in one form or another. And I think he's saying the same thing again. Any alcohol, whatever, into his system, underline, please, something happens. Something happens. When I put it in my system, what happens to me doesn't happen to my brother. Didn't happen to my dad. Didn't happen to most people in my life. But the second I put that in my system, something happens both in the bodily, let's underline bodily and underline mental. Bodily refers to the craving, the physical craving. Remember in the beginning, I suggested anytime you see the word physical, think craving. Well, bodily means physical craving, and mental sense. Mental sense is the obsession. Something happens to me in the body and mental sense. What is it that happens? It makes it virtually impossible, and I've underlined impossible, for him to stop. And underneath it, I've written simply that it becomes physical. Once it becomes physical, there's no stopping it. Depending on if technically, once I'm in the obsession, there really may be no stopping it, because obsession is defined as a thought which overcomes all thoughts to the contrary. So if I'm in the grip of the obsession, I'm using. But be that as it may, once I put it in me, that's the point of no return. Once it becomes physical, all bets are off. The experience of any alcoholic, and I've underlined any alcoholic, and above it I've written A/O, will abundantly confirm this. This next paragraph, I've highlighted the first 5 lines of it. And let me go over that section first. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend, please underline, never took the first drink. If we never took the first drink. Now, what does taking the first drink mean? It means that the obsession has won, right? I'm not taking that first drink because of a physical craving. I don't have it in me yet. But once I take that first drink, I've given in to the obsession. So that's what I've written over never took the first drink. I wrote gave in to the obsession. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never gave in to the obsession, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Please underline terrible cycle, and above it write craving. We've triggered the allergy. We've poured the allergen over the allergy, and that's what happens. Every time I start the terrible cycle in motion. So what's the conclusion? Let's underline, and I've actually put asterisks before and after this next sentence. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic, and above alcoholic, I've written A/O. The main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. Remember, before we take that first drink, we are stark, cold, stone cold sober. Or as Joe and Charlie say, stark raving sober. If I asked you to make a list of the 5 dumbest, stupidest things you ever did, I bet this would be missing from it. I took the first drink. That was the dumbest decision I ever made, and I did it stone cold sober. I wasn't under the influence. I wasn't craving anything. The dumbest thing I did, the stupidest thing I ever did in my whole life, I did sane. Stone cold sober. Think about that. Ask yourself, what are the 5 craziest things I have ever done? And I bet that's not going to be listed on it. The point being, the phenomenon of craving cannot overcome us if we don't take the first drink. Therefore, the book now begins to focus solely on why we're unable to abstain by using willpower alone. That's the focus from here on in, is that point. It's the first drink. That's the one that gets you drunk. As Dr. Silkworth said, he said, the obsession condemns you to drink, the allergy condemns you to die. It's blunt, but it's true. The obsession condemns us to drink, the allergy condemns us to die. Or you want to be a little bit more politically correct, the obsession causes you to drink, the allergy causes you to get drunk. Either way. Okay, so for the next few pages, we're going to focus on the mental obsession. We're no longer talking about what happens once we ingest these chemicals. From page 23 to page 43, we're going to look at this. And we're going to ask, why am I powerless over alcohol before I take the first drink? We're going to focus on the obsession, is what I'm saying. From 23 to 43, that's what we're focusing on. We're asking ourselves, why am I powerless over alcohol before I even start drinking? Good question, huh? Okay, continuing that paragraph. If you ask him why he started on the last bender, the chances are he'll offer you any one of 100 alibis. Let's highlight alibis, and above it, write the word lies. That's what an alibi is. It's a lie. It's a rationalization. Excuse me. Sometimes these excuses, let's highlight excuses, and above it, write the same word, lies. That's what it is. It's a lie. Have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in light of the havoc an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. So taking that first drink is the worst decision we ever made, and we did it sober. They sound like the philosophy of a man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning, fallacious just means something that's crazy. It's senseless. It lacks logic. That's what fallacious means. It's not a sex act. Fallacious just means something that's crazy and senseless and lacks logic. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off, or, and I've underlined this because this was me, become irritated and refuse to talk. Whether you're talking about my problem or religion and God, my reaction's the same. And please underline this next sentence. Once in a while, he may tell the truth. Once in a while, he may tell the truth. If we ask somebody who is relapsed, well, they asked me when I was asked. And those of you who heard my story know that I've celebrated 10-year anniversaries 3 times in recovery. And every time you ask me why I did it, my answer was the truth. Though I didn't realize I was telling the truth. And that's why I've underlined once in a while he may tell the truth. Because the truth is The words that I said when you asked me why I did it was, I don't know. I didn't know because I was not here. I had checked out. I was out of my mind. The part of me that made that decision was a brain that was less than whole. So when I say I didn't know, I didn't know. I may tell you some lies, some alibis, some excuses, but in the end, the answer I gave you first is the truth. I don't know. I really don't know. I didn't mean it that way when I said it, but in retrospect, yeah, that was the truth. I was not home when I made that decision. The stupidest thing I ever did. I did without thinking. And let's highlight the whole rest of this paragraph, and I think we could wrap it up at that. And the truth, strange to say, is usually he has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. Some drinkers have excuses. Let's underline excuses and again write lies, with which they're satisfied part of the time. But in their hearts, they really don't know why. They don't know why they do it. We're not aware of the mental obsession. We don't know why we do it because we don't know we're responding to an obsession. Once this malady has a real hold, they're a baffled lot. There is the obsession and underlying obsession, please, and above it write lies, that somehow, someday, they will beat the game. And next to that, I've written the big lie. That's the big lie. Someday, somehow, I will do this, and it won't turn into a debacle. But they often suspect they're down for the count. So what we're going to be talking about for the next few pages, next 20 pages or so, is the obsession. So just like in the beginning, in the doctor's opinion, we defined our terms, we defined allergy on the very first day we got to get, well, one of the first days, we defined allergy as a body's abnormal reaction to any food, substance, or chemical. That way we know what we're talking about when we talk about the allergy. But what about the obsession? What does that mean? Obsession is defined, and you may want to write this down, a thought that overcomes all thoughts to the contrary. A thought that overcomes all thoughts to the contrary. A thought so strong it can make me believe in a lie. That's what an obsession is. A thought so strong it blows away all thoughts to the contrary. It's a thought that is so strong it could make me believe in a lie, which is our definition for delusion. And we'll get to that in a couple of chapters, but that's basically what obsession is. It's that idea so strong, it blows away all the knowledge and experience I have to the contrary, and it makes me make decisions based on a lie. We're going to wrap it up at that point.